Hello and welcome to this episode 142 of Extinctionati. And we will try to throw some light on the latest IPCC climate panel report that was or was not released past this Monday. And I kind of see a pattern here because, I've been around for a couple of winters and for the past two reports at least, they tried to go into some kind of concept art tradition where they tried to erase the difference between a release party and a non-release party. So that they're going to Stockholm or they're going to Interlaken in Switzerland and say, yeah, we have this new report, and everybody who looks for the new report figures out there's no new report. There's some kind of summary, and a new report may be around next year, which was the case in 2013. That report came on the last day of January 2014. So everybody who went to Stockholm came home without a report, and everybody on the internet had to wait like 6 months for the report. And at the same time, this Monday, where they released their final synthesis report, or didn't release, as the case may be, for the sixth assessment report series of IPCC climate reports. So that report is not out yet, and we are waiting around in anticipation. All we got was a summary and something they called longer report, which was longer, but it wasn't a report. So, so I'm kind of looking at IPCC as part of what everybody now calls the clown world, where everything is kind of upside down, topsy-turvy, and just looking silly, where the General Secretary of the UN has no audio on his mic and that kind of stuff. They've just been working 9 years on this latest report, and they haven't figured out basic audio issues like 3-4 years ago when they released the cryosphere report. I think they had massive feedback on their speakers in the press release room, and even though they didn't want to talk about feedback mechanisms at all, the technique was talking very loudly and increasingly loud about feedbacks. So they're trying to play the total amateur card, playing into the clown world meme, and they don't know anything about any audio video things at all, and the laziest kid on the internet has better video and audio skills than the United Nations, which gets loads of tax money from everybody on the planet. Okay, so that was my little sarcastic intro, and today we have Dean Walker on my right here on the screen, and you're a special guest for us because we had a little chat last Tuesday, Dean, and if you're anything like me, you have the long and winding road together with the IPCC climate panel, sort of as a villain and hero, back to villain again, and then hero, and it's kind of a messy ride. So can you take us into what this climate panel really is and how you relate to it in your life?
I'd be happy to, and it's really a pleasure to be here. I've had a couple of opportunities to be in various pockets of Reddit, and it's astounding to me how broad and deep the communities are, the layers of different communities. So I'm as much here to find out, where people other than myself stand on these topics, and it's just a real pleasure. Torstein, I just think I made it clear for you Tuesday when we talked that, I just think it's a a real opportunity every time I get to speak with you, because you definitely bring an extraordinary, grounded, and often different point of view than I have, and different in a good way that I feel expanded by it. So all I can tell you is, well, I'm Dean Walker. I've been putting together a lot of resources and support for the collapse aware and collapse acceptant communities around the world. Excuse me. In my little organization, I have a little website and offer a online community space where there's courses and that sort of thing. And part of that is what I call the sober data, which is what I filled up half of my 2017 book called The Impossible Conversation about all this kind of stuff. And I got to tell you, I don't think I'm going to be too far distant from many of the folks on this stream. I've always held it that the IPCC is really just the mouthpiece for a very tightly controlled narrative. And as sincere as I know that the scientists are that are doing all that important work, I consider it just a small fragment of what we're actually facing. That being the climate change issue and how we measure it in parts per billion, parts per million, and so on and so on. It's just an extraordinarily and excruciatingly controlled narrative from my point of view, and I'm not exactly well known in the doomosphere, if you will, but I did have a couple of years ago, in anticipation of the COP meeting in Scotland, I was invited to write an essay for a compilation of essays for that particular COP, and it was my first real opportunity to write something directly about my experience of the COP process and how I was looking into the future through that lens. And what I can tell you, just to cut to the chase, so I don't bore you with the story. I mean, I was impressed because first time I was asked to write something like that. So I thought, wow, this is important, but it wasn't important enough. I did not make it into that book, mostly because I told it like it is for me, which is that this is a functionless process. It is one in which you've also included the word agency in the agenda for today's conversation. And no matter how hard I look, I can't find the notion of agency for myself or anybody at a non-corporatized government level of expression. All the rest of us, in my interpretation of it, we don't have any agency in this process. And so I particularly was struck by the foul results produced and the events themselves in both Scotland and then the most recent COP meeting. And then this report, I think it's nice that they put some stronger language in. And I have a hard time taking the reports and the events seriously. So let me just stop there, because I don't want to just be a buzzkill for the conversation. I'd like to hear what other people have, if there are particular points of view or particular questions that people would like to spark the conversation. I think that gives you a little bit of sense of what I do, which is providing support and resources for the collapse aware community. And then my thoughts about COP are not particularly flattering to the process. I do appreciate the sincere work that the many scientists do, but I hold no hope or agency within that my experience of the whole IPCC arrangement. So let me just stop there and see if that sparks any
Yeah,
conversation.
no, that's very good. I think we find ourselves now in a new situation as far as science and misuse of science, or the concept of science, what people call science on the television. You know, we had Mr. Fauci, who told everybody that he was science,
Mhm.
and if he really were science, then that science changed dramatically from week to week for the pandemic situation, because he contradicted himself very clearly
Right.
over and over and over again. So I think and Karina can attest to this. It's kind of a new situation where everybody who has been alive for the past 2 years, 3 years, are asking themselves, okay, so if they lie about this stuff, right?
Yes.
Who says that?
Yes.
Who says they're not lying about climate change and everything else? And I think the question is a very good one, of course, because the way I see it, we have to follow uh, actual science as science is for itself, uh, even independent of the particular scientists, you know, because scientists are, they like money like everybody else. They can be corrupted. They can be forced to
Mhm.
step in line with their institution, and to sort of say popular things to get new grants from the government and whatever.
Sure.
So I think I appreciate and yeah, I think it's a good thing that people are asking these questions and trying to look at the hard facts about climate within science. You
Yeah.
know, because it's um, it's always a bad thing when people say that the science is settled or everybody agrees, because that's not what science is about. Science is and should be about
Right.
raising different perspectives, at least, and developing the understanding of the thing of study. Um, Karina, can you help me out here?
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. I liked what you said about just how there's so much misinformation and inconsistencies and about the science. I just wanted to mention something I learned. I read. I'm so glad I read James Hansen's book. I wouldn't be motivated today, but I read it twice. It was really hard to read.
Wow.
It was torture actually, but it's helped me ground me when I read papers, and so I look at the big picture, you know. But he made a really interesting observation in his book, Storms of My Grandchildren.
Mhm.
He's come out with a new book. You can actually get it like a rough draft on his site. But I just wanted to quote what, you know, he's been very frustrated with the IPCC,
Mhm.
and just to quote how he describes the work of the IPCC from his Storms of My Grandchildren. Um, a lesser scientist might have prepared a report that went into great detail about climate complexities and how climate and carbon dioxide were changing year by year, then made some estimates about how things might continue to change in the future, all with large uncertainty. I am not criticizing the reports of the IPCC. Those detailed reports have also a useful place. But Cherney chose a different path. And Cherney, in his book, he describes, and he just came out with a paper this year with a bunch of people and other scientists. But when reading the paper, it feels like a continuation of his book. So I've been reading it little bit by little bit. But he talked about Cherney Jules Cherney is like very important to Hansen's work, and Cherney was hired by President Jimmy Carter because Jimmy Carter was very worried about the opening up of projects like the gasification of coal and fracking. He was
Mhm.
very worried. Maybe that's why he didn't end up becoming into second term. So he hired Cherney from the it's the National Academy of Science that was created by Abraham Lincoln to tackle big projects. I think that's what it's called, the National Academy of Science. And Cherney, just this really brilliant scientist, what he did is he did he's known for his climate sensitivity. What would happen if you double CO2? What would happen to the temperature at equilibrium? And it's so interesting because, and this is where I have questions for you, Torsten, because you follow a lot of ice, But so what Cherney did in this this model it's a model that he came out with, back during Carter's time. But what he did was he focused on the fast feedbacks, the ones that are relevant to our, timeline that's relevant to us, to the public. And the ones that he deemed most significant were clouds, aerosols, water vapor, snow cover, and sea ice change rapidly in response to climate change. So he went in. This is where, you were, I think you were mentioning that the IPCC wasn't talking enough about feedbacks. I think one of you guys mentioned that. So basically he implied in his model that he would keep the ice sheets, vegetation, and long-lived greenhouse gases are fixed. So the ice sheets, meaning the land ice sheets. So basically he left out the ice sheets on Greenland and Antarctica, which he categorizes as slow feedbacks. So the IPCC, you would wonder, why aren't they, following Cherney? Because this is more of a, the climate is very sensitive, and Hansen really appreciates Cherney and his contribution, and he doesn't care so much for the IP. He says it's important, the reporting, but it doesn't really. There's a lot of uncertainty, and like I was mentioning earlier, just to repeat, that how the climate and carbon dioxide, reporting on how CO2 greenhouse gases are changing year by year, and then making some estimates and how things might continue to change in the future, all with large uncertainties. And that's what I feel. Do you guys feel that with the IPCC reporting? It's just, I feel like it's like they're just reporting on what's happening, and that's it, and they're not looking at the big picture of the scary feedbacks and the
absolutely and you leave out those ice sheets at your peril, literally. I remember it's not many reports ago. I think it's like 2 or 3 reports ago. Then the IPCC tried to assess the sea level rise prospects for the 21st century, for 2100. And they were like, when the oceans get a bit warmer, the molecules expand. So we're looking at like 20-30 centimeters for the rest of the century. And in the footnotes, it says, we left out the big ice sheets, Greenland and Antarctica. Not because they won't contribute with enormous amounts of meltwater, but because it's difficult to assess. So because it's difficult to assess, the IPCC report sets it to 0 centimeters. That makes sense, right?
Well, the thing is that, though, talking about that, there's and you probably know more about this, Torsten, because you study the ice. There's a difference because in Cherney's report, he was including the sea ice, not the land ice. So sea ice is what floats, which is in the Arctic, and also around Antarctica, there's sea ice, and that's what's So now the ice on the shelves, the continental shelves in the Arctic, that's considered land ice. So we have to. I wish they would go into more. Hansen would go into more detail about this, because once you start melting away also the sea ice, whatever buttresses the land ice, and that's looking like it's happening in the Arctic. And like you said, Torstein, it's looking like in the last 2 years, things are really melting now. It's been dormant in the Antarctica, but now things are melting, you know.
Yeah, I think maybe if it's okay with you, Karina, maybe we could leave some of the ice developments for a little bit later today, and
Sure.
Go on roasting the IPCC a bit more, you know, because they really deserve it. They really deserve it, and we don't want to delay that roasting. So if you imagine one of these long roast pins and somebody slowly turning over the coals, the body of the IPCC, or maybe the collective number of reports that they emitted. Yeah, as I introduced the report, the report itself isn't even out yet. You know, it's like we're still waiting for the presumed Monday final report, final warning report. You know, as if they're not going to issue more warnings and go on screeching like the right side of politics would say about climate alarmists. Yeah, they will go on screeching about alarm for many years yet. And I think, you know, when I think back to the previous report that didn't come out in 2013, that was delayed to 2014. That triggered something in me, because then I finally realized, based on the very little research I'd done, it triggered something in me when I read the relevant parts of the report in 2014 and saw that they were totally dismissive about the Siberian taiga, the forests burning, that couldn't happen or wouldn't happen in any big way.
Yeah.
And the same thing for methane releases. They were very stable and could not go crazy at all. Everything was sort of everything that they didn't completely know would happen. They said this won't happen, you know. And the way I always understood IPCC since I was a teenager is that they're not going to. We don't want the climate panel to only tell us what already happened. Just like you said, Karina, they're more like describing what happened and what they can no longer deny. We wanted the IPCC to look around the corner and see what's coming. You know, is this really dangerous? When it's going to be dangerous? And what, if anything, can we do about it? Right? But they're more like. Yes, I think Saudi Arabia can keep pumping oil, and I think we can just go on business as usual for another decade. That's more like their job. You know, if you and I, if the three of us see them failing, it's because we don't know what their job is, what their job description is.
Mm-hmm.
Their job description is more like, how can we keep everyone calm through this shitstorm, and how can we give the governments who are our bosses in this arrangement, how can we give the governments of the world a green light to go on doing whatever they want to do, like wage wars and look for coal and oil and gas. Yeah, so I was thrown into this great doubt about everything back in 2014. The only thing I knew was I didn't trust and couldn't trust any politicians. I couldn't trust any mainstream media. I couldn't trust any scientist who was allowed to speak in mainstream media. Okay, so you basically you cannot trust people. That's what it comes down to. The only ones you can trust is if you, for some reason, you know a climate scientist personally, from high school or university or something, right? But that wasn't the case in my situation. So what I had to do was to dive into the raw data of things, and the most available raw data at the time was the data for sea ice extent and stuff. And then I soon found out via the sea ice forum on the internet that there was something called volume and thickness that was more important than the surface extent and area and stuff, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, so I studied that and found out how to visually present it so that I could understand it and other people could understand it. And when you do that, you kind of find out that what they call tipping points and points of no returns. You can sort of find out by reflecting on the graphs and the numbers yourself that in some cases the tipping point for this kind of ice was back there, maybe before we put up the satellites to observe the sea ice, right? In some cases that is the situation, and there's also an interesting thing that I think you, Dean, you had an interview with Kevin Hester, where he put this point that a decade or two ago there was a lot of talk about tipping points, but now that we've passed those tipping points, it's gone awfully quiet about tipping points from those same media savvy scientists. So it's like when it was opportunistic to talk about tipping points because that was a strong argument to force business and governments to do some more action on the thing. Then they talked about tipping points, but when we had actually started seeing them in our back mirror, when we were ahead of the tipping points or on the other side of the tipping points, it just goes dead quiet. And that's where you have the expression in English that silence speaks volumes. Comment, anyone to that?
Well, talking about, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, talking about the tipping points, according to, gosh, what is that called? The German group he's a famous German scientist. I think you guys.
Schellenhuber?
He's more current. He said, yeah. So basically, let me see. I think I have it here. Potsdam, yes, from the Potsdam Climate Institute in Germany, that there's a really nice map of their tipping points, and they say the vulnerable tipping points. And they say that the ones that have tipped officially is the Arctic sea ice and the West Antarctic ice sheets. So that assumes the sea ice. That's what I'm assuming, the West Antarctic sea ice, because it's below sea level. So those are the two that officially have tipped according to the Potsdam Institute. But they have a really nice map showing like all the vulnerable tipping points.
Yeah, I think the West Antarctic is a land ice actually. Because,
it's sea ice. There's land and there's sea. There's both. But I think that's the part that's still confusing to me is which of it is sea and which of it is land,
No, it's basically as simple as sea ice is saltwater ice. It's
right,
salt
exactly.
Water. And everything that is dumped in the sea from the land is still kind of land ice or glacier ice.
Yeah.
But I think it's a point of confusion for satellites. I think the satellites are more like, oh yeah, there's some ice in the water, that's sea ice. I'm pretty sure that the Greenland calving icebergs and stuff are counted as sea ice by the satellites. So it's really.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
So I think it's really much less many cubic kilometers less actual sea ice than they report, because up in Ilulissat in Jakobshavn, the ice fjord there is like actual cubic kilometers of icebergs. One iceberg is like 1 kilometer in every direction, right? And if it stands 200 meter above surface, it's grounded at 800 meter below surface on the bedrock. So that they are really, really huge. And if they are counted as sea ice, that's like a very big error, we could say.
Oh yeah, yeah.
To freeze that much sea ice around Greenland, it's just not done any longer. It's,
Yeah.
Too late for that.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I have another comment, but Dean, I wanted to let you speak. It's about protests in France, and I saw something interesting that as we were talking about the IPCC. So, but Dean, you go first, because
Okay. I'd like to stay on this thread for just a bit longer, because I so appreciate both of you obviously putting in some time, some sincere time over these years about the issue of sea level rise. And obviously that has a lot to do with the distinctions of what is land ice, what is sea ice, and so on. Particularly, Karina, I'm curious if you've, in reading Hansen's book or books, I have not read them, but I've been trying to follow up since I was doing the research for my book. It's got to be, what is that? That's 6 years now. Back 6 years ago, I stumbled across a headline of some sort of mention of Hansen's estimation that we were looking at 3 feet of sea level rise every 10 years for the foreseeable future. And to me, that would just literally took my breath away. Like, oh my God, that is so much larger scale than anybody is talking about. So I just want to plant that seed with you. If you know anything about that, or give me a thread to follow, because I've tried to find any of his reports, any of his findings that reflect that, like the real deal, like the actual report. So if you know anything about that, I'd like to just plant that seed. And for anybody who's watching this, if you know anything about that projection from Hansen. The other is at the back end of Dar Jamal's book, Farewell to Ice. He was also, as he did so beautifully in all the different dimensions of his book, he was with a climate scientist and particularly a scientist who had a tremendous amount of expertise around sea level rise again. And this was with regard to looking back through the records of parts per million of CO2. Following that track, and what this particular, and I'm sorry, this is just me remembering, because what you've been talking about, when he had talked with this particular scientist, and the projection was something in the ballpark of 100 parts per million increase of CO2 would yield 100 feet of sea level rise. And that's nowhere near what I'm hearing from anybody else at any level, certainly not from the IPCC. And so I plant those two seedlings with y'all, so that if you know anything about either of those projections, I'd love to get to see the actual reports, the calculations that's based on. And it's also immensely provocative. I've been carrying both of those, and I just haven't had the space to do that conclusive research on my part. So I'll just leave that with you. I don't want to nudge into a new topic yet. I appreciate you giving me the space. And Karina, if you want to go ahead and bring up the
Oh,
pieces that you
sure.
just wanted to bring up. And I'm also curious, do you have any response to those two, floating elements, and have any way to bring it to more of a conclusion?
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Can I just have a very short
Sure.
intermission? Because I think this is relevant to the point of why IPCC was really started, back in the 1980s. Because then as now you had people like Jim Hansen, who did his or their research and published it, and said things the hard way, how things really are, right? And the reason, as more and more people understand now, that the Americans actually, or the CIA, initiated the IPCC, was that they wanted to silence those kind of quote unquote activist scientists. They didn't want people like Kevin Anderson and Jim Hansen to just go to the media with their stuff and scare the shit out of everybody.
Yeah.
So instead, they wanted to have the governments in control in a panel in Switzerland to sort of pick the right scientists, the scientists we want to hear from. So that's my short intermission.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was trying to point at in my first comment, which is the controlled narrative. It's like a straitjacket for the conversation. There is no conversation because it is so controlled. I think that's really well said, Thorstein. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is gonna sound surprising, and I hope I'm not causing more confusion. I'm not worried about sea level rise, because, okay, so James Hansen, this is where I depart from James Hansen. He has a lot of faith in humanity and technology, and I don't at all. I'm just kind of like, and so Hansen is trying to save this planet eating civilization, which I call it. And so sea level, it's interesting because he talks about, and I'll get back to the sea level. My big worry is the overheating of the planet. So sea level rise, and just to quote Hansen real quick, he just did a paper with a bunch of scientists this year, and he's going to come out with a sea level rise in the pipeline. So the paper is called Global Warming in the Pipeline, and it's going to be followed up by Sea Level Rise in the Pipeline, where they're going to present evidence that continued warming and increasing ice melt can cause shutdown of the overturning ocean circulations within decades and large sea level rise within a century. So, so going back to that, one thing that James Hansen, so heat is, the overheating is on my mind big time. But Hansen has an interesting theory that he kind of talks about in the book, but he doesn't elaborate a lot. I don't know why. Maybe because he doesn't. Sea level rise is scientists like to talk about it because scientists tend to be conservative, and so they like to be as precise as possible, and sea level rise is much, is more precise. Liling Chang and Kevin Trenberth have really good articles on sea level, on the ocean, sea level rise, and that. So I can get those for you too. But going back to inertia. So in his book, Hansen talks about the 3 largest sources of inertia. The number 1 is ocean. Number 2 is ice inertia. Number 3 is global energy systems. One thing about Hansen that he doesn't talk about, and I never heard him talk about, is that we are running out of cheap fossil fuels. And it's looking like, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Gail Tverberg, but I follow her stuff very closely. It looks as if this whole thing could be crashing, who knows, but in the next few years, like a Jenga puzzle or whatever. So, but James Hansen never brings that up, which is, it's an integral part of trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future. So, but so the oceans have been taking the brunt of the heat. They're taking over 90% of the heat that humans have added to the planet. Second is ice inertia, but ice sheets move much slower. They're slower feedbacks, not sea ice, but we're talking about the ice in most of this inertia is in Greenland and in Antarctica. So that's starting to soften up. And he talks about it in his book how it's like what's recently happening in Antarctica. It's starting to, it's really ramping up. And so in his book, he talks about this ice inertia, this he implies that that it could slow down warming. That's the impression I get. I could give you a quote. It's probably easier that I quote on that. Hold on. Do you guys want to continue while I find
I
the
can
quote? Okay.
I can continue a bit. I just read the latest Nature articles and stuff on the subject of large icebergs going into the Southern Ocean from Antarctica, and they've found out that in the deep past, we have had ice ages, or sort of between ice ages, going back to ice age, and a big part of that mechanism has been large tabular icebergs from Antarctica going into the South Africa, South America, Indian Sea territory and melting out. And the meltwater from those bergs have changed the salinity, and that again has changed the ocean currents, and it's also drawn down from the atmosphere a lot of CO2, making it colder because there's less CO2 in the atmosphere. So that has been a part of the mechanisms of the glaciations previously. But the main point that is way down in the article, the main point that is that even though this has been a big mechanism before, this will not happen this century because, as you said, Karina, most of the heat that we're producing on this planet goes into the oceans, right? And the problem is that the Southern Ocean is now too warm for icebergs to survive sailing through it and going north. Down south they say going north instead of going south, then the things goes wrong, right? So you cannot pass the Southern Ocean circular sea currents when that shit is like 2 or 3 degrees warmer than it used to be, because the icebergs melt out really fast. And there's also been some research on the shape, the design of icebergs, how that is important to how fast they melt out. Basically, the shorter outer walls you have, the longer you last, in a way, because it's only the ice that is in contact with the water, with the seawater, that actually melts. So if you have like a big fortress or a big sort of rectangular iceberg that melts out slower, yeah, is basically which parts of the icebergs that are in contact with the seawater. And the other main point from those articles is that even though this was a big part of the going back to ice age mechanism, it was also, these planetary closer to the sun, farther away from the sun. These sort of variations that you have in the rotation of planets and sky objects. So sort of when the distance to the sun and the heat from the sun and whatever, when that is sort of the basic mover, then all of these kind of earthly ice mechanisms, they come in and they intensify or they amplify that already existing change of the.
Yeah, I'm still trying to look for it, but going back to the way that they could affect it is like, this is what Chris. Have you heard of Chris Van Steenbergen? Dean? No,
No.
he's a I believe he's Dutch independent scientist. He's on Twitter, and he's been following. He's the only scientist that's really following this. This ice inertia, but the way he's following it is he's pretty doomy. I mean, what he's actually an apocalyptimist. He believes, he has faith in humans and technology. However, he says that this possible cooling effect, it could slow things down, but we only have a few years. I mean, it's the overall picture looks horrific. You know what I mean? However, he probably is thinking, because he wants to fix the climate situation, like having more time to act. Now he's thinking about that we're officially now out of La Nina. We've just experienced a triple dip La Nina. And climate models, we were supposed to have more El Ninos, but we had a triple dip La Nina. And it's, and I read a scientist was talking about that we're not modeling the ice sheets properly. Most of the models that the IPCC uses is not modeling. We keep on adding bells and whistles, but we're not adding in the ice sheets. And so this triple dip La Nina really shocked scientists. And so what Chris Van Steenbergen is following right now, he's following all of the icebergs leaving Antarctica. He goes in very elaborate detail, and he's thinking that this could keep us from going into another El Nino. I mean, prevent us. He's hoping that we can go into another La Nina to prevent overheating of the planet, and that we don't go into El Nino. So that's.
Yeah, I think hoping is the key word. I follow his Twitter, and I've looked at many of his links, and really good sites for following the icebergs and stuff. And so I wish he was right, but he seems to also to be sort of the only person hoping, or the only person sort of finding hope in that kind of thing. And it's always interesting to look into how these ice ocean interactions work. So I'm thankful for being pushed to look into that more. And he says that everything will be decided in April, which that kind of guys always say. But we can you and I, Karina, we can get back to that kind of midway into April and stuff, and see. It would be very interesting if we could actually, stop the El Nino that way. Yeah. Because then I think we would see super tankers and military ships starting to tow icebergs up to the relevant areas, and we could sort of stay cool by using iceberg transports. Or
And another thing that Hansen, so he does talk about this ice inertia being a big deal, right? But he doesn't talk about global civilization collapse, and he doesn't talk about the methane. He talks about, in his book, he talks about methane, and he goes back into paleoclimate and how, the methane hydrates were behind the PETM and the Permian, and he really digs in deep, saying it really changes, it gets a lot of carbon in the atmosphere in a very short time, and paleo records. So he never talks about like the work of the Russians and the ESAS. Now Chris Van Steenbergen, he includes all of that. He covers everything. So so I don't know why Hansen, it frustrates me so much. I mean, Hansen knows of the danger of the methane hydrates in shallow continental shelves. He doesn't in his book, and he doesn't really specify where exactly, but there's shelves all across, all over the continents. However, he doesn't talk about the work of the Russians, which I find so weird, because that is just, I mean, you just look at that and it's scary. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but yeah, I just wanted to leave it.
I started tracking the methane up on Svalbard in Ny-Ålesund. There's a research station called the Zeppelin Mountain Research Station. It's driven by Norwegians and Swedes. So I managed to hack into their data.
You hacked into their data?
Data tables. Yeah, you looked away, but I did the quote unquote.
Oh, okay.
So it's really difficult for a normal person to get access to their up to the minute latest measurements of methane. Mm-hmm. But me being the old university educated information science person, I was patient enough and skillful enough to pierce through like a Viking with my sword, pierce through the bullshit on their website and get to the heart of it. So that's a long intro to saying that we are looking in April this year. We are looking to getting the very first annual average. Let's say the whole year average is going to be 2,000 for the first time, 2,000 parts per billion as the average for the entire year, right? Mm-hmm. That's a massive new milestone for methane.
For what is that?
For methane.
Oh, for methane, yes.
Methane in the air at 150 meters above sea level or something.
Yeah.
So the entire Arctic is just crazy high on methane.
Yeah.
And the curve is like this. Yeah, it's kind of going straight up like the human population curve, right? And so that's really crazy. But I think because Dean, you are our special guest here, we have to interact a little bit more, I think, before you have to go. So I want to get back to this the point about human agency, what we really can and cannot do on this planet as human beings, as a species, as an organized United Nations, which they tell us that we are, but it's kind of, you have the official version and you have the real version underneath. So my feeling is that the whole reason that they're doing the climate science integration into the UN system, as we talked about, it's part one is that they want to control it and keep the loudest voices down and having to do as little as possible. But the other thing, some sort of more official reason, is that they want to have the best science available in order to maybe do something. That's kind of their official line, right? But that requires that we are able to do something, because if we weren't able to do something in the first place, then we wouldn't have needed the best scientific overview of the situation. So Dean, do you agree with me that there's precious little we actually can do, even if we could get our act together? There's very little we can do because of these feedbacks that are triggered and blah blah blah.
Yeah, I do think that there is precious little we can do for both of those reasons. One being the seamless tsunami wall of control of the people who have access to the most profitable and addictive power source that humanity's ever seen. You just cannot overstate their commitment to draining every single drop of fossil fuels out of the planet, and they're going to sell it and they're going to profit from it, and everyone else be damned. And so that's just what I see. And with regard to what's already in place and moving, even if I just took 10% of Guy McPherson's famous essay that he continued to add on the elements that are already moving, already in place, already tipping points having tipped, and so on. The number of ways in which we have taken ourselves beyond a point of no return, and only a small portion of them, in my version, have anything to do with climate change. There are so many other global scale human caused predicaments that are already in place and in motion. I don't see a way out of either of those loops. And one thing I'd just like to mention, I'm not quite sure, Karina, what work from the Russians you're talking about. If it's about methane and that they've been doing for decades now, or if it's something else. I'd like to just mention something that I think you were not talking about, but it overlaps. And that is something that I don't hear about in mainstream media at all, except for the things that I dig for, is the actual Russian production of fossil fuels in the Arctic Circle, which is extraordinarily active. And it is a massive project involving multiple floating nuclear reactors to power new cities to be able to pull these fossil fuels out of those offshore and onshore sources. I just find that so, just tragically bordering on evil in the face of what we're all talking about. And we try and put in the word agency when we have that scale of project going on. And then not to mention what the US has just approved in Alaska, and on the list goes. It seems like it's a moot conversation. It's already a done deal. So I hope that's not too dismal and doesn't shut down the conversation, but that's just what I'm seeing in both of those categories that you brought up, Torstein.
Yeah, I was talking about Shakova and Semeletov,
Yeah, exactly.
For decades. Yeah. Now, it's interesting what you're bringing up. The only reason we are still eating is because of fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. So the reason why we have 8 billion people, so they are just trying to keep this civilization going. Yeah. So I think this is where a lot of environmentalists don't understand that if we, keeping it in the ground means that we starve. So I think there needs to be an honest conversation of the fact that this civilization has been built on cheap fossil fuels. Yep. And so they're just keeping it afloat, which hopefully it collapses soon. I'm kind of with Torstein. I'm with the that Derek Jensen. What group is that? Just let it all collapse. And for me,
deep green resistance.
And it's happening on its own. And I think Derek Jensen and his group have accepted that. Let it it's collapsing on its own. So let it collapse, But yeah, so what kills me though are all these environmentalists, all very privileged environmentalists, in the privileged world, that are just keep it in the ground. It's like, well, do you want to eat or do you want to starve? So you choose.
Yes, yes, I find myself in kind of the same place because you know, yeah, as I usually say, it's gonna collapse anyway, and in the meantime, do we want to eat or not eat in the meantime? And I would
Right.
vote for eating in the meantime. The, it doesn't have to get more complicated than that.
That's right. Pretty simple.
Yeah, it's because the way that we're seeing the collapse going. I was listening to Jeremy Grantham, who is a billionaire. He's got a lot of interesting. You'd be surprised at how much he knows about the climate, but he's definitely a hopium guy. But he was talking about what was he? Oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought. Oh man, I just forgot what I was about to say. Oh, he said that economic chaos can come at anywhere. It could be in, it's already happening in, you're seeing, I think a lot of the French protests are much more than the pension of increasing the pension age by 2 years. It's a lot more than that. France is really suffering more than more than Germany on their energy crisis is much worse than Germany's, because I think Germany has subsidized. Of course, it's coming to Germany. So
Cool.
yeah, no, I pretty much I got my point across. Yeah.
Yeah, after 1 hour, there is a going down and going up again. I'm sorry about the disturbance.
All right.
Yeah, so I think we really need a lot of dark humor. What's that called again?
Exactly.
Gallows humor in a situation, because it goes from dark to really dark. That's kind of the differences within this field. And as I told Dean this past Tuesday, you kind of need to sit in the dark and sit through the night and see the first signs of morning, and all kinds of things with light at the end of the tunnel, all kinds of things like that. And many people these days, even within the doomer and the climate community, are so afraid of going into that dark night of the soul, where they really assess the end of civilization and that kind of thing. And that's why, to my belief anyway, that's why they don't see that there is hope actually within that new field of research, or the new field that opens up if you actually sit in that dark night and think through those things. And what are we willing to lose? What can we lose? Can we lose television and Love Island and those kind of things? Yes, I vote yes, we can lose those things. Can we lose all functioning ecosystems, all grass and tree species and all animals? No, we cannot lose that. That's kind of the basic operating system. Even for humans on the planet, we need all of those things. And but that is kind of on the lucky end of the collapse. When it collapses, because it will collapse. The wild plants and animals will get a boost because you no longer have cities and industry and people everywhere.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing a way that I might be able to bridge to the word that you've included in today's agenda for the conversation about agency. Because everything I've said so far has been pretty dismal about agency at any level of what we've been talking about. That's just the way it goes. And I hear all three of us very aligned on that. There is no agency from my view, for the common folk. There is just none. The only place where I've encountered agency since really taking this on seriously, creating the body of work that I'm doing and having my own practices in place and and writing the book and so on is given what you just said, Thorstein. So how do we look out ahead beyond when it all collapses in? You're inviting us to find some sort of hopeful, imagined future on the other side. And I hope you're right. I have no clue. It's above my pay grade. I have no idea.
Yeah, I would take inspiration from from the Sami and the Inuit people who've been doing these kind of weird things in remote places for thousands of years. Like herding reindeers.
Yeah, I get it, absolutely. I get what you're pointing at. And I guess what I wanted to just offer as sort of an overlap of what I can bring to today's conversation, other than just similar to the both of you, like it's going to happen. So yeah, is if I'm lucky enough to have a small number of people in my neighborhood, my family, somehow, some people who are kindred spirits, people with whom I can have conversations like this, people with whom I can be honest about the sometimes really difficult feelings that come up around exactly this kind of thing. We're looking at the most difficult conversation in human history. It implies existential roots. And I know I'm not telling you anything new. I'm just trying to tell you how I orient, again, my own practices and then the work that I offer to support others. And this is the only place where we do have agency. If I'm lucky enough to have a group of kindred spirits with whom I can meet on a regular basis and we can have a small supportive community, the only way I know to generate that kind of positive future, or even just the thread, start to imagine a thread, and we're going to go through some hard times between here and there. In order to go through those hard times, I need to cultivate agency. I need to cultivate self-awareness of how I get triggered when I'm sitting in a group of people with some of whom I don't agree with, and they say something that triggers me, or I say something that triggers them. Do we have enough capacity to keep sitting in that circle to be able to work it out so that we prevail? There's an us that prevails at even the smallest level. That's where we have agency. How, and the personal practices, the personal version of that is, how can I expand my capacities to be present in the face of larger and larger stressors?
Mm-hmm.
And so if I've got that as a practice, and you've got your version, and Karina, you've got yours, then we bring those practices sincerely to each other and say, hey, I need some help looking at some of my shadow today. I got some shadow going on because I'm telling you, I'm feeling upwelling of violence against the bullshit that I just saw from that corporate voice, or that government voice, or that person on the other end of the political spectrum, or whatever. That's how I can build out a capacity that includes having some agency, that includes having some more internal space and awareness, so that I can possibly be of service to the people I love, again, as these waves of larger stressors come through. So I just wanted to say something about agency that I think we actually could engage with, no matter how small a group or small a situation we actually live in.
Yeah. I wanted to say, you over the years, because I woke up in 2016, and a lot of your videos really helped me. And I went through a very long anger phase, and you really, really helped me. I think when you're in the anger phase, that's really important. I'm kind of like, as who coined it, post doom. What's his
Michael
name?
Dowd.
Michael Dowd. Yeah, I'm in post doom. And I've been volunteering at my local shelter from 2017. And we're kind of the front lines of the collapse. You know, I do dog walking and just and I've gotten very close to the other volunteers, and this is I can't talk about these things with them. However, they know something is wrong in their subconscious. It's in my it's in my conscious, but I know. So I've learned to bite my tongue a lot and just help them just with dealing with what they're frustrated about at the shelter.
Yeah.
You know, because they're like, why is this all happening? And but they don't want to look at the big picture, and that's okay. I basically meet them where they're at.
Yes.
And I help move them to another state, knowing the big picture of everything.
Yes.
And I was very courageous. I mean, I felt very nervous, but I shouldn't say I was courageous, but I did talk to the director and did say there are problems around the world, just trying to understand where the director is at in because managing what's happening right now, you kind of as the leaders have to know what's happening, even if they don't want to know. That's but with the volunteers, no, of course, with the director, I didn't go into details, but I just said, there's outside influences here going on, and it's going to get worse. And so I just needed to communicate that to the director. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of like my friends are not, I don't really have close friends in the doomer community. My friends are the people that I share similar values, similar interests, even if they don't know what exactly is going on, and that's okay. On Facebook, that's where I get my support with the doomers around the world, because it's really hard to find people locally, who really will face this, because I think to face this, you have to face your own mortality, and after trying to understand the work of Ernest Becker, and a lot of our behaviors have to do with, we're the only species that knows that we're going to die, basically. Ernest Becker is a cultural anthropologist, and he wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning book, Death Denial, and while he was dying. And then Sheldon Solomon took his work and and spent his whole career getting empirical evidence on the work of Sheldon Solomon. On Ernest Becker. So a lot of the way people are acting right now. Catherine Ingram interviewed Sheldon Solomon in one of her episodes, and I mean, it's just spot on, the things that, especially with the left, how the left are acting, which is so baffling to me. So yeah, no, I highly recommend if you YouTube Catherine Ingram's Sheldon Solomon. A lot of the weird behaviors that we're watching right now, you can find. Sheldon Solomon can explain in his.
Yeah. I think locally, where I live in Greenland, I am for the first time in my life in a very, very special situation where the 85% Inuit majority, where the government of Greenland and the people are so way ahead of all the rest of us, so way ahead of Scandinavia, EU, America, Japan, whatever. Just 2 years ago, second time I voted in the elections up here. The new government after the election, first thing they do is on summer solstice, they ban oil, coal, and gas exploration for all future in Greenland and Greenland seas. So it's like, okay, that wasn't expected. That wasn't what anyone asked for, but they just did it anyway, because they value the clean fjords and the clean water and soil where people hunt and fish. They value that before financial fortune or whatever. because they realize that all kinds of extraction from the sea and the land eventually pollutes that land base, and then people get cancer from eating the fish and crabs and stuff. So it's like for the first time I've experienced genuinely reasonable and ecological government. And it's fantastic.
Nice.
There's nothing to protest about. I haven't for once felt the urge to go out into the street and say, "Don't do this, Greenland. Please don't do this," because they're doing all the right things and then some. And it's kind of, to me as an individual, as a person, it's very good, because I've been on this 5 or 10 year project to phase out activism from my life, because I realized that it wasn't going anywhere, and like the agency discussion was really nothing we can do anyway. So why be on this activism horse? If it's just redundant, if it's just a moot point or a death cramp, like when you catch a fish, they have death cramps down in your bag for many hours afterwards, and those death cramps from my activist life, I'm trying to put to rest, so that I can, basically be put to rest myself, or be free to do other stuff, right, in my life. So that's a local situation, and I wanted to say that I really appreciated your previous comment, Dean, and I totally agree, and I think it's pretty creative that you talk about the agency that we do have. We made clear that we don't have agency in the larger climate war situation, but we very rightly do have agency when it comes to, for instance, creating these meeting spaces, where we can talk among ourselves, and also talk to the audience on the YouTube live chat. And I think that's important. I think it's important, not in an activist way to become, hundreds or thousands of people in a socially powerful way. I don't think that is our agenda, but it's more like helping people who are, like in the illustration for this episode, with a raging storm on the sea, and people standing on different cliffs and islands with lights, points of lights. We need to have solidarity, amongst ourselves. We need to be a little bit more resilient than what people usually are these days, and not take any little thing that comes up and let that be sort of the goodbye line between us, because there's the entire culture now is about splitting people, splitting ourselves from each other, and we can't have that, because we can't really afford to to lose a friend for every new international piece of news coming up.
Yeah.
I need something for my throat.
Well, it's coming on time that I've got to start to fade out of this conversation. And Karina, it's really good to meet you. I so appreciate you have obviously a very vivid view of the various things that you take on to research, and that kind of clarity and your ability to articulate. I think you have a really strong voice, clear voice for a conversation like this. I appreciate what you've been doing.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for the kind words.
Before you go, Dean,
Yeah.
I wanted to hear your feedback on this. I saw it started when I saw something on somebody on Twitter saying that the IPCC. This is like just from my memory, but the IPCC, in his opinion, was and is the biggest conspiracy in all of human history. And he was coming from our side of this discussion, right? So
Sure.
he was coming from the perspective of seeing the IPCC climate panel as somebody who is covering up the fact that the entire culture that we've built over 12,000 years is coming to a crash in our lifetimes. That is basically their main job, is to sit there and spew little facts and reports and stuff, and make incredibly bad live streams from their press releases.
Mm.
I did live streams releasing our web projects for the Sami radio in Copenhagen back in 1999. 1999, we managed to stream live video and audio from Copenhagen, but the IPCC somehow can't in 2023. It's incredible. So what do you think about the proposition that the biggest conspiracy of all time is what the IPCC has been doing and has been created to do?
Yeah, I get the point, and I think it's essentially accurate. I just don't believe that that's the largest scale that we can be talking about in terms of that level of conspiracy. I'm not really a conspiracy person, but in terms of what you're talking about, the control of our global cultural narrative, it is so complete and it is so intense. I started really bringing it in when I wrote my book. I couldn't believe that I was talking about Edward Bernays and the beginning of propaganda and so on, and how that has come to be just weaponized at a global scale. It is what controls our thinking and our actions completely now. And one small but very important part, is how they created the IPCC to have it go exactly the way it needed to go, and that the rest of us would just have to accept that that's the best way for this to be happening. So I agree. I think it's essentially accurate, and I would couch it that it is a small facet in a much larger control strategy that will see us go into a wave within my old guy lifetime of large-scale purging of population, massive suffering, and so on. The things that I think we're all very aware of. So that's how I would respond.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was really brilliant. Maybe, what do you say, Karina? Should we end this together with Dean?
Yeah, let's end it. Yeah, I think this is a good. Really enjoyed the conversation. It's very. I feel very emotionally nourished by the things that you guys, because I find myself going deep into the science part, and I need to do more of the emotional stuff. So this has been it's been very helpful for me.
Well, Karina, you're always welcome, as is anybody who's watching this thing. You're always welcome to come and check out the various kind of offerings and support that we have available. That's really the territory that we land in the work that I do, because there's just too much of the data.
Yeah.
We're now at the flood stage, and I gag on it. It's too much for me to be able to process or hold. So you're always welcome. And
Thank
it's
you.
really been a joy to meet you and to spend time with you both and have these conversations. I very much appreciate being invited. Thanks.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you guys, both of you.
What can I say? You know, you all said it already. Karina, can you just hang around after
Sure.
we end it, just for
Sure.
you and me? That's great. So, Dean, thank you very much, and I would recommend everybody to do just what Dean said and check out his weekly conversations, his weekly support calls, and he has a lot of material about the situation. Read his book and read the support material for his close circles.
Thorstein, is it possible to put links to my community
Yeah,
space and link and the website? It's all there in my email.
Just
signature.
if you can just send me an edited suggestion, I will put it in the show notes. That's super.
Okay, it's actually there
Yeah.
in all of our emails. Any of my emails has each of those links. So, yeah.
That's super. That's super. And we hope to have you back whenever the IPCC declares to quit doing what they do, or for some other big event. And then we would like to have you back, Dean, or even before that. So,
maybe next time I come, we could start at the point that Karina was just talking about. What is it to offer each other some emotional nourishment and some space holding for that side of the conversation? That's really what lights me up. So anything remotely like that, feel free to give me a call as well.
Super. Okay.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you guys later.
Bye. Take care.